In 1980, four village nuns from Northern California mysteriously vanished without a trace, leaving their close-knit community hollow with grief and uneasy speculation. But 28 years later, the priest makes a shocking discovery, uncovering the horrifying truth about what really happened to them. The morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Agnes of Mercy Catholic Church, casting a kaleidoscope of colours across the polished wooden pews. Father Elias Morrow stood at the altar, his voice solemn yet steady as he concluded the memorial prayer service. "May the souls of the departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace," he intoned, making the sign of the cross before him. "Amen," the congregation responded in unison. Father Elias looked out at the assembled faces, many elderly, some middle-aged, and a few younger parishioners. All had gathered on this somber day to remember the four nuns who had vanished without a trace exactly 28 years ago. The mystery had haunted the small town of Eldon Hollow, North California, for nearly 3 decades now. As the service ended, Father Elias moved to the church entrance, greeting each member of the congregation as they filed out. Many offered condolences, though after 28 years, the words had taken on a ritualistic quality rather than carrying the raw emotion of fresh grief. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Harmon," Father Elias said, clasping the elderly woman's wrinkled hands in his own. "Your presence means a great deal." "I always come, Father," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can still remember Sister Mildred teaching my children their catechism. Such a gentle soul." Father Elias nodded, feeling the familiar pang of sorrow. Sister Mildred Hayes had been 68 when she disappeared, a lifetime of service to God cut short by whatever tragedy had befallen her and the other 3 nuns. One by one, the parishioners departed, each carrying a different memory of the missing women. Sister Mildred Hayes, 68, Sister Joan Keller, 65, Sister Beatrice Namora, 28, and the youngest, Sister Ters Morrow, 23. For Father Elias, the wound ran deepest. Sister Tertz had been his biological sister, and her disappearance had shaken his faith to its core. When the last of the congregation had left, Father Elias slowly made his way back through the now empty church. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he moved toward his private office at the rear of the building. The space was modestly furnished, a simple desk, a bookshelf filled with theological texts, and a window overlooking the church cemetery. Alone at last, Father Elias sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The composed facade he maintained for his parishioners crumbled away, leaving only a man consumed by grief and unanswered questions. "Why, Lord," he whispered, his voice ragged with emotion, "I have served you faithfully all these years. My sister dedicated her life to you. Why have you not led me to them? What lesson am I failing to learn from this trial?" Tears leaked between his fingers as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. He rarely allowed himself this moment of weakness, but the anniversary always stripped away his carefully constructed defenses. After several minutes, Father Elias drew a deep breath and wiped his eyes. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay several photographs, preserved with loving care despite the passage of years. The first was of Tertz, on the day she took her final vows. Her young face beamed with joy and purpose beneath her veil, and Father Elias felt both pride and a stab of guilt as he gazed at the image. He had been the one to nurture her faith, to encourage her vocation. He could still remember their conversations when she was just 16, her eyes alight with conviction as she spoke of her calling. "I was so proud of you," he murmured to the photograph. "I still am." When the last of the congregation had left, Father Elias slowly made his way back through the now empty church. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he moved toward his private office at the rear of the building. The space was modestly furnished, a simple desk, a bookshelf filled with theological texts, and a window overlooking the church cemetery. Alone at last, Father Elias sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The composed facade he maintained for his parishioners crumbled away, leaving only a man consumed by grief and unanswered questions. "Why, Lord?" he whispered, his voice ragged with emotion. "I have served you faithfully all these years. My sister dedicated her life to you. Why have you not led me to them? What lesson am I failing to learn from this trial?" Tears leaked between his fingers as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. He rarely allowed himself this moment of weakness, but the anniversary always stripped away his carefully constructed defenses. After several minutes, Father Elias drew a deep breath and wiped his eyes. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay several photographs, preserved with loving care despite the passage of years. The first was of Tertz on the day she took her final vows. Her young face beamed with joy and purpose beneath her veil, and Father Elias felt both pride and a stab of guilt as he gazed at the image. He had been the one to nurture her faith, to encourage her vocation. He could still remember their conversations when she was just 16, her eyes alight with conviction as she spoke of her calling. "I was so proud of you," he murmured to the photograph. "I still am." The thought that had haunted him for 28 years crept back into his mind. If he hadn't encouraged her religious vocation, would she still be here today? Would she be a mother, a teacher, alive and well? "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," Father Elias said sharply, making the sign of the cross to banish the treacherous thought. He could not allow himself to question God's plan, even in his darkest moments. Setting aside Tertz's photograph, he reached for another, the last known image of the 4 missing nuns. They sat together on a wooden bench outside the small, remote St. Dina's Chapel, near the edge of Shasta Trinity National Forest. Sister Mildred and Sister Joan, the eldest, sat with their hands folded placidly in their laps, their lined faces serene. Sister Beatrice sat beside them, her posture more relaxed, but her expression reverent. And beside her was Tertz, the youngest, her eyes bright with purpose, even in the faded photograph. The picture had been taken by a local visitor just days before the nuns disappeared. They had travelled to St. Dina's Chapel for a short spiritual retreat, 2 days of fasting, prayer and silence before the feast of a Catholic saint. The diocese had also tasked them with assessing the old chapel's condition to determine whether it should be restored or decommissioned. Sister Tertz, with her eye for detail, had been asked to document the state of the structure. Father Elias stared at the image, his mind drifting to calculations he'd made countless times before. Sister Mildred would be 96 now, Sister Joan 93. Even if, by some miracle, they had survived whatever befell them, they would be frail, ancient women. But Beatrice would be 56, and Tertz just 51, still potentially in the prime of life. He remembered the frantic days and weeks after their disappearance. The police had searched the forest extensively, combing through underbrush and scaling nearby mountainsides. Search parties had spread out through surrounding farms, villages and towns. But not a single clue had emerged. No scraps of clothing, no personal effects, no signs of struggle. It was as if the 4 women had simply vanished into thin air. The official theory had eventually settled on a bear attack. The Shasta Trinity National Forest was known for its wildlife, including black bears that could become aggressive if threatened. Perhaps the sisters had wandered too far into the woods and encountered a predator. But the complete absence of evidence had always made that explanation feel hollow, both to Father Elias and to many others in the community. Over the years, uglier rumours had begun to circulate, whispers that the nuns had abandoned their vows and run away to start new lives. Father Elias and the church had worked tirelessly to quash such speculation, but the seeds of doubt had been planted nonetheless. "Tertz would never have done that," he whispered, tracing his sister's face in the photograph. "She would never have left without telling me." As he continued to gaze at the image, his eyes drifted to the background, the chapel itself. St. Dana's had been a simple structure, constructed in the 1920s to serve the scattered Catholic population in the area. Its white walls and modest bell tower were visible behind the nuns, surrounded by the looming trees of the forest's edge. Something tugged at Father Elias's heart as he studied the building. He hadn't visited St. Dana's in over 20 years, finding the memories too painful to bear. But now, on this anniversary, he felt a strange urge to see it again, to walk where his sister had walked, to pray where she had prayed. Perhaps it was mere sentimentality, a desire to feel close to Tertz on this difficult day. Or perhaps a small voice whispered in the back of his mind, there was still something to be discovered there, some clue overlooked in the initial investigation. The latter thought was almost certainly foolish. What could possibly remain to be found after 28 years? Yet the pull was undeniable. Father Elias carefully replaced the photographs in the box, except for the one of the 4 nuns at St. Dina's, which he slipped into his pocket. He rose from his desk, collected his Bible and rosary, and left his office with purpose in his stride. In the church parking lot, he slid behind the wheel of his modest sedan, placed the photograph on the passenger seat beside him, and said a brief prayer for guidance. Then he turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from St. Agnes, heading toward the forest and the ghosts of his past. The winding road leading from Eldon Hollow to the Shasta Trinity National Forest carried Father Elias through a shifting tapestry of landscapes. The town's neat houses and quiet streets gave way to scattered farms, then surrendered entirely to dense wilderness. Tall pines and towering cedars lined the roadside, their shadows dancing across the asphalt as the sun slipped lower in the sky. The drive took about an hour and a half, time enough for memories to resurface. He thought back to those terrible weeks after the disappearance, when he had driven this same route daily. Back then, his car had been packed with missing person flyers bearing Terz's face, his heart still clinging to desperate hope. Now he carried only memories and a gnawing, quiet sorrow. As the road narrowed and began to climb into the foothills, Father Elias slowed his vehicle. St. Dana's Chapel had once stood in a clearing near the forest's edge, accessible via a modest dirt road that branched off from the main highway. He scanned the roadside, searching for the familiar turnoff. But when he reached what he believed was the right spot, he frowned. In place of the old dirt path was a paved private road, guarded by an ornate iron gate. A large "No Trespassing" sign was posted, along with smaller notices warning of private property and surveillance. "This can't be right," he muttered. Pulling his car to the side, Father Elias retrieved the photograph from the passenger seat and compared the background landscape to what he could see. The mountain ridge matched, so did the cluster of tall pines beyond the road. This was the correct location. But the chapel, St. Dana's, was gone. He stepped out of the car and approached the gate on foot. Beyond it, the road curved into the trees, flanked by neatly planted ornamental shrubs. The whole area had been landscaped, transformed into something manicured and artificial. There was no trace of the old white chapel. Bewildered, Father Elias took out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts. He found the number he was looking for, Harold Gibbons, the long-retired caretaker of St. Dina's. They hadn't spoken in years, but if anyone knew what had happened to the chapel, it would be Harold. The phone rang several times before a familiar voice answered, older now, but unmistakable. "Hello? Harold, it's Father Elias Morrow from St. Agnes in Eldon Hollow." A pause. Then, "Father Elias. My goodness, it's been quite some time. How are you?" I'm well enough, Elias replied, though it wasn't entirely true. Harold, I'm standing at what I believe was the entrance to St. Dina's, but the chapel appears to be gone. Another pause, longer this time. That's right, Father, Harold said quietly. The diocese decommissioned the chapel years ago. It was sold in 82. A man named Silas Redwood bought the land. He had it demolished. Father Elias felt a chill, despite the late afternoon warmth. I never heard anything about the chapel being sold, he said, voice tight, let alone demolished. Well, after what happened with the sisters, attendance dropped off sharply. Then there was that incident with the bell tower. It cracked, nearly came down on top of poor Thomas Frell. The bishop decided it wasn't worth the upkeep for such a small congregation. Elias's eyes remained fixed on the forbidding gate. And Mr. Redwood, does he still own the property? Oh, yes, Harold confirmed. Quite a place he's built back there. Big house, landscaped grounds. Keeps to himself, mostly. Bit of a recluse, from what I hear. Doesn't mix much with the locals. I see, Father Elias said slowly. I had hoped to visit the chapel today, for personal reasons. It's the anniversary. I understand, Harold said gently. It's been 28 years, hasn't it? I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing, Father. Do you know if Mr. Redwood is ever open to visitors? Perhaps if I explain the situation— To be honest, Harold interrupted, he's not known for his hospitality. Father Elias sighed, disappointment pressing heavy on his chest. Well, thank you, Harold. I appreciate the information. Listen, Harold added, I still live nearby, not 15 minutes from where you are now. I saved some items from the chapel when it was decommissioned. The old altar cross, a few prayer books, things like that. You're welcome to come see them if you'd like. That's very kind of you, Elias replied. Perhaps I will, but first— His eyes remained fixed on the gate and the forest road winding into the trees. I think I'd like to try speaking with Mr. Redwood. Father Elias followed Harold's directions around to the public road that skirted the edge of Redwood's estate. The lane narrowed and twisted through dense trees. Through occasional gaps, he caught glimpses of a massive structure. Not a chapel, but a sprawling mountain lodge of stone and timber, with wide terraces and sharp eaves. Eventually, he found a small gravel shoulder near what appeared to be a side service path. He parked, straightened his clerical collar, and began walking toward the house. The air felt still, unnaturally so. As he passed manicured flower beds and a decorative pond, Elias couldn't shake a sense of disquiet. Something about the estate felt wrong, sterile, manufactured. The front door opened before he could knock. A tall, athletic man in his 60s stood there, a sleek German shepherd at his side. His silver hair was neatly groomed. His eyes were cold. Yes, the man asked. The word was clipped. Good afternoon, Elias said gently. Are you Mr. Silas Redwood? I am, and you're trespassing. I apologize. My name is Father Elias Morrow. I'm here because— I know why you're here, Redwood interrupted. You're from that church in Eldon Hollow. You want to sniff around and ask about your precious chapel. I only want to understand what happened. I didn't know it had been demolished. Well, now you do. It's gone. The land is mine. Elias took a breath. Did you build anything where the chapel once stood? Redwood narrowed his eyes. Why do you ask? I found what appears to be an old air vent near the site, and I heard something coming from it. A voice, chanting. There was a long silence. Then Redwood sneered. You priests always hear things. You hear what you want. I'm not accusing you of anything, but someone may be underground on your property. I've called the police. Redwood's entire body stiffened. The dog growled low. I suggest you leave, he said quietly. Now. Father Elias backed away, but as he turned, he heard something faint, almost inaudible, from the trees beyond the house. a woman's voice, singing a Latin hymn, Salve Regina. Deputies arrived minutes later. Elias led them to the rusted vent. Harold joined them, visibly shaken. As they crouched beside the grate, they heard it too, the unmistakable sound of human humming, followed by a cough. Deputy Williams radioed for backup and a medical unit. Then, without asking permission, they began searching the property. What they found stunned everyone. Hidden beneath a grove of ornamental trees was a disguised access hatch. It led down into a reinforced concrete tunnel, old but functional. The passage twisted beneath the earth and opened into a single room. A room with a metal cot, a rosary, a cracked icon of the Virgin Mary. And in the far corner, hunched on a stool, was a woman. Gaunt, silent, clutching a small wooden cross. She turned as the flashlight hit her face. It was Sister Ters Marrow, alive, emaciated, eyes hollow, but unmistakably her. They rushed her to a hospital. She could barely speak, only fragments. The name Silas came up, so did Down there, and he said it was God's will. Redwood was arrested on the spot. What followed was an investigation that rocked the entire region. Sister Ters had survived underground for nearly 3 decades. At first, there had been all 4. Sister Mildred died within months. Joan followed. Beatrice disappeared, or perhaps tried to escape. Only Tertz remained. Redwood, once a theology student expelled for radical beliefs, had trapped them. Not for ransom, not for violence, but for punishment. He believed the nuns were false servants and that their suffering would purify them. The chapel had been desecrated in his mind, so he turned it into a tomb. But he hadn't accounted for faith. For 28 years, Sister Tertz prayed, sang hymns, waited, and on the exact anniversary of her disappearance, her brother, the one who had guided her to her calling, had come back. By grace, or by fate. Sister Tertz would never fully recover. Her body had been broken, her mind deeply scarred. But she lived. She was moved to a convent in Southern California, where she received round-the-clock care. Father Elias visited her often. They rarely spoke of what had happened. Instead, they prayed, not for answers, but for peace.